Hello, EnderSword here again with another Bronze League replay. This one was posted by Gerkan, our Terran player, on the TeamLiquid.net strategy forums, and he was looking for advice in the Terran versus Protoss matchup. So his opponent for today is going to be the Silver League Protoss player Encounter over here on the left-hand side of the map, and we are on Chikura's Plateau. The three key points that I'm going to be looking at today are number one, supply blocking yourself and how important it is to prevent that from happening, and how to definitely prevent the chain supply blocking from happening. Basically where you get stuck in a situation where you're just supply blocking yourself every single round of production. And we see that basically happen to our Terran player constantly throughout this game, and it's something that you've really got to avoid. Production is something that we're going to be taking a look at. You've got to be constantly producing out of your facilities, whether it is the command centers getting your workers up or whether it's your military facilities. You've really got to be smoothly getting your army out, getting your economy out in order to allow yourself to be competitive in the game. If you don't, you're just kind of wasting time, wasting those facilities and not getting full use out of them. The third thing that we're going to look at is engagements. Basically, most battles are decided simply by the way that you engage them. When you chose to do it, where you chose to do it, and kind of the angle that you chose to attack. So more than any micro, it's just the initial engagement of a force that often will determine whether you're going to win or lose that battle. And we'll see that come up just a couple times in this game. Now, we saw there that the probe has completely chased off the original SCV from completing the barracks. That's something that does happen a lot. The probe will come in and start harassing that SCV. As soon as you have any indication that's going to happen, immediately pull a second one off your mineral line and go and try and help that. You don't want to be stuck in this situation where there was about a 10-second gap where the barracks wasn't being constructed, wasn't being finished, just delaying everything else that you're going to do. It's going to totally throw off the rest of your build order. And in this case, he ends up with a 5 hit point SCV out as his scout. That's going to be vulnerable to just being picked off by a single probe with a lucky hit as he loops behind the mineral line or something. Just a single little poke at it's going to kill it. That's not going to be a very effective scout. You're not going to get a really good long look at anything. You're not going to have any options. So you want to just avoid that sort of situation where you're not getting a good peek. Now back home here, the orbital command goes silent at about 4 minutes and 10 seconds. And it's going to stay that way for a little while. It's really crucial that you do constantly be making SCVs out of your facilities. This is what is going to make you competitive in the game, is how much economy you have. And we had about a 30-second gap there before another one was begun. So really you're pretty much missing almost 2 full SCVs there. So where the worker count is currently 16 to 21, could easily be 18 to 21 right now, and once you throw in the mule, well, you're actually ahead of where the Protoss player is. So you've got to be staying on top of that sort of thing and making sure that you get as much economy as you can and not just missing it, losing it to gaps like that. There's another about 6 or 7 second gap there in which nothing was being produced, and you just really got to be avoiding that, or you're going to put yourself so far behind so early and not really know why you're doing it. It's just because your economy isn't up to par, and you'll start to feel like you can't afford to do anything at all. Early on here, we also see that we're going to get into our first awesome supply block situation. Orbital command isn't being used, and we are producing out of our barracks, but right there got stuck at 27 for a moment. The command center does get done and alleviates that, but we're going to now enter a phase where chain supply blocking just happens over and over. So the orbital command, since it gives a little more, does clear that up for the moment, but with a lot of production now coming online, we've got 2 orbital command, well, command center and orbital command online. as well as the 3 barracks, we're going to be consuming supply a lot faster than we were initially in the game. So you've really got to be chain making supply depots to try and stay ahead of that number to allow you to adequately produce what you need to produce there. Turning this into an orbital command here, but when that's done, again, going silent, not producing SCVs out of this facility, is producing up here, but then stops after that one's done, just not making enough workers, just really getting behind, not making workers, not making a supply depot. We've got the tech lab here, just now started the technology, but he's had really the money available to get this going for a couple of minutes, so you want to try and make sure that that timing happens a little better as well. And we start to build supply depots in a reactive way. We're now 46 of 46 before that one's done, but then another one isn't immediately started yet. Instead, we go for the factory. It's not a matter of not really having the money. We do have the money to start another supply depot, but instead we're going to let ourselves get supply blocked again before going to another. So only 2 room left by the time that this one's starting. Again, this orbital command's not being used, orbital command just starting, and bam, we're supply blocked again. So when this reactor comes online, which is meant to help us get Marines out much quicker, well, we can't use it because we're completely supply blocked until that's done. And as soon as that depot is done, we're almost instantly consuming all of it, so that this factory comes online and we can't produce anything. So you've got to, as you're ramping up your production, switch into a mode where you're making 2 or 3 supply depots at a time and staying ahead of your actual consumption of that supply, or you're just setting yourself back and you're not going to be making things at a steady rate, and that's really going to make your army a lot smaller than it has to be. Over on the Protoss side here, we can see that he snuck a extra base here, and yeah, that's pretty sneaky, but we haven't actually scouted in a long time anyway, so for all that it matters, it could easily be at the natural, and we haven't taken a look there anyway. So it kind of doesn't matter that it's a hidden expansion at this point, because we haven't bothered to check whether or not it's at the normal expansion. You've got to be keeping your scouting up a little bit and knowing whether or not, knowing what your opponent is actually doing, what kind of direction they're checking in, where they are going, or else what you're doing could be totally wrong. We're clearly going for an all bio force. There's no real attempt to add any sort of mech here. Obviously not going to be teching to tanks or Thors or anything anytime soon. No attempt to build Hellions or anything like that. So we don't really know what we're facing at this moment without taking a look. Finally does go for the natural, which is now going to be his 3rd expansion, but we're just completely unaware of this anyway. Scans could be going down. There could be scouting being done with single Marines, anything like that. You could at least be controlling the watchtowers to keep an eye for any force coming over. Right now, this is just a very passive and blind force, and just a very blind build. We don't really know what we're preparing for, but putting missile turrets down in response to kind of nothing. There's nothing that's going to be threatening to do anything about that. There's no real drop concern or airplay concern or anything like that, but we're just kind of blind to the situation. Back to the supply blocking idea, we want to get the first medevacs out, but immediately are supply blocked. It's just taking a lot longer to get these out on the field. Like, these medevacs could have ideally been out based on the time that he put the starport down. He took a long time to switch the starport and factory, and then supply blocked at the crucial moment that he decided to build them. These actually could have been out on the field at about 11 minutes if everything was done on just based on when he built the starport. Could have been switched over and out at about 11 minutes, but instead we're not going to get them until 14 something. So they're going to have less time to build up energy, we're going to have less of them, and it's just really cramping overall production that we're constantly hitting this supply block wall, and we're going to do it again. As soon as these first two are out, we're not going to have room to make more. So you really want to be getting those medevac numbers out, not only because you need them to heal, but again because we're blind to what the Protoss player is doing. He could be going for a bunch of Colossus, and then we're going to need to switch into Vikings. He could be going for a big heavy Archon army, and we're going to want to drop a lot of different places. We're going to want to split up, have a lot of healing. We're going to want to transition into something else, but because we don't have that room, we're very limited in what can be made. Now, a drop does get loaded up and goes by an observer. The observer is here. You can still see them. Well, you can't right now, but when the medevacs are coming by, you can still see that there's a blur there. So always be aware that you may be spotted when you're doing something like this. Now, it happens in this case that the Protoss player wasn't really paying attention, so he doesn't see this drop. But we see that the drop occurs in a fairly non-crucial location. He didn't really have a specific target, ends up picking off a few pylons, and then as soon as an army begins to respond, picks up and leaves. So he got 4 pylons in construction, which does temporarily supply block the Protoss army, but he could have gotten so much more out of that. If he had picked off the robo facility, that would have been absolutely huge if he had just targeted that down. If we had dropped over here, we could have picked off probably the entire Nexus by the time that that force came all the way from up here into this area. He also then kind of wanders the dropping force into the middle of the field as opposed to taking the safe route up here, and nearly gets one picked off full. You have to be aware that your opponent, if you're not controlling the watchtower, your opponent probably is. So you don't want to be wandering a force like that through the vision of the watchtowers, or you can definitely get picked off there, which is obviously going to be really bad. He did reveal the fact that he has blank stalkers now, so that is a little more dangerous to be flying through the middle. You want to be taking the safe paths if at all possible, if you don't think that they're going to be scouted. So he's moving into a slightly more aggressive position now. He does have some idea of the composition of the Protoss army, which we didn't really have before. However, knowing that there's this many sentries and this many immortals in this army, kind of the logical transition is into ghost technology. You know that this is very energy-based and very shield-based. These sentries haven't been used, so they've pretty much got full force fields on all of them. There's no reason that they wouldn't have full energy, and those force fields can really do a lot to disrupt your lines. And we know that the Immortals are very much based on the shields that they have in lowering the amount of damage that they take from your Marauders. So it's very important to strip the energy and shields off of these units. So instead of moving right now into an aggressive position, he should really be looking into teching towards ghosts, which just do so much damage against this type of army. He's very dependent on having those energy and shields. There's no zealot cover to this or anything. So the initial engagement, while it starts okay, is in this tight choke. It's very easy to cut him all off, very easy to put him behind these force field walls. He ends up with his medevacs lagging completely behind, getting damaged and picked off by these stalkers, and we end up losing this huge investment of medevacs just due to a positioning and engagement problem. So I will rewind to that and just look at the initial engagement. Where did we do it? And I'll kind of slow it down at that point. So we know that they're coming through a choke here. This is definitely not the type of place that you want to engage. When you see that the Protoss is coming through this tight area, he should have immediately backed up until he was in this more open zone. The whole idea is to have a big concave around the entire Protoss army so that you can not be force fielded away like that, so that you're not going to have half your army not firing. The whole idea with these ranged units is to make sure that you've got everything completely focused and surrounding that entire Protoss army. If he had pulled back to behind this little wall, because of his own medevacs, he'd be able to see onto this side, but the opponent wouldn't be able to see him. He'd have to engage through that wall of shrubbery or whatever that is. You'd be in a much better advantage. By choosing to charge forward into this tight choke, he lost a battle that by all rights he probably should have won, even without the ghosts available. You see here that even with a bunch of force fields, it was harder to prevent a lot of damage from happening because the force fields had to be done also in a big arc, and it's not really preventing any of these things from firing. So if that was a much bigger force, while you're force fielding things out a little bit, they're now in a single file line, and they have the same range as the Protoss unit, so you're not actually holding anything back or separating it at all. There were no zealots in this composition, so it's not like he could cut the army completely in half and take advantage. He'd have to wall it out completely. So just the initial engagement there really lost that battle because they were somewhat equally matched forces. At the time, it was 1-1 versus 2-2. The timing was really good. He did literally just have 2-2 completed almost at the second that he engaged that force, so the timing was okay, but the location was really, really bad, and it was the location that cost him that engagement, I guess. And then, of course, running the medevacs and having them in front of his force just lost all of those where they could have done a lot better to get rid of the remainder of this force. Obviously, this game is now over. He's in and camping the production facilities of the Terran player. A-Walk Protoss, always fun. Important to point out here, it was the Terran that was actually just A-moving in, and the Protoss picked his location well and threw down his force fields well, used his Guardian shields well. It was him that was using those abilities. It was the Terran player that was actually kind of A-moving into position and doing it in the wrong position. You really have to think about where you want to engage. It's so important, and it's something that's often very much ignored at low levels. You don't want to be engaging up ramps if you can avoid it. You don't want to be engaging into chokes if you can avoid it when you know that your opponent has control of those chokes. It's when someone has that many force fields and that type of force, Blink Stalkers and Immortals and a bunch of sentries, the choke, that's not going to work for you. You don't want to be going into that situation. As Zerg, you definitely don't want to be engaging into a choke against a Protoss or a Terran, and Terran doesn't want to be doing it against a Protoss. You want to catch them in the open, take advantage of the fact that you have superior numbers. You're going to have way more actual forces. The better concave you can get, the more you're spreading out their fire, the more you're focusing yours, and you're just going to peel them down. Obviously here, Ghost Tech totally makes sense. If you were scouting what had happened, what the opponent was doing, there's no Zealots there. We're all based on energy and shields. There's no Colossus there, so it's okay to not have the Vikings, but Ghosts would have absolutely ripped apart that army if they had been able to get some EMPs down and prevent any of the force fields and strip the shields off of the Immortals and the whole army. A single EMP can cause thousands of points worth of damage, and they are just absolutely huge. So it's something to be considering and getting yourself used to using even at a low level, because they just are so potent. I usually don't ever give advice of, oh, you need this unit out, but when it's something like that, you really do need to incorporate Ghosts into your play. They are probably the strongest unit in the game, to be perfectly honest, so really you do want to be incorporating that. But overall here, outside of that engagement, it was just a matter of not having enough production out and not having enough production out due to constant supply blocking. Even being 2 base versus 4, the initial engagement here was done with about an even size army. If instead of being even sized, more production had been done such that you had, say, 17, 18 more Marauders, that could have been overwhelmed even with the bad engagement, even with bad positioning, and even with the compositions the way they are. So by clearing up that supply, that could have easily gone the other way, and that's what should be focused on at this level in particular. There were just so many times it happens, and it's so easy to fix just by keeping it in your mind and staying on top of it. It's the easiest thing to fix, and you'll find yourself just walking over opponents. So I hope you find that helpful, and everyone,